Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kate Kunkel-Patterson. I'm a park ranger. I'm an interpretive park ranger at Whitman Mission National Historic Site. Show of hands, who's been there before? Oh yeah, cool, awesome. I'm glad to hear that. So first of all, thank you all for being here, coming out on a chilly Thursday afternoon. Thanks to Fort Walla for asking. It's always great to work with our local history sites, so definitely happy to be here today. So very briefly, a little bit about me. I've been an interpretive park ranger with the National Park Service for just about 8 years now, a little over that. My career with the National Park Service has taken me, to South Carolina, to Idaho, to Illinois, and then here to Walla in kind of a circular route. I actually went to college in Walla and worked at Whitman Mission as a seasonal ranger during the summertime. So it's nice to be back in this community. It's nice to be back at this park and kind of circling through. So before we dive in to what we're going to talk about today, which you can read on the screen behind me, I want to acknowledge how vast and how massive this particular history is. The story of this place where Whitman Mission National Historic Site now sits, it begins thousands of years ago, and it continues to this day. Oh, I'm sorry. Would you guys like me to remove my mask? I'm sorry. I'm just so in the habit of it. All right. I wear it all day at work, and then I just forget I have it on. So, is that better? Yeah. Great. All right. Lovely to see all of you. So the history of the place where Whitman Mission National Historic Site now sits, like I was saying, begins thousands of years ago and continues to today, right now, tomorrow, next week, thousands of years into the future. And this story begins and extends through Cayuse stewardship and the relationship with this land in that one specific spot, and with this entire valley and this larger traditional homeland. There is so much that we could talk about, that we could explore in this history. So it actually makes it really challenging to narrow in on a very specific subject. It's a good problem to have. There's too much to talk about. I could have talked today about White's laws. I could have talked about the changing relationship between the Cayuse and the Whitmans over the course of that 11 years, or how the housing styles of the Cayuse and the missionaries can give us some clues to some deeper underlying differences. So many other things. But I had to choose just one. So I couldn't help but notice that this history, talking about the Whitmans, is all over the news lately. Anyone seen any of these? Yeah, this is a small sampling. I actually had more images I couldn't fit on this slide. This history is everywhere in our news, especially in the Pacific Northwest, but even more so, more broadly, across the nation, with articles in the Washington Post and the Seattle Times. So today, we're going to briefly talk about the event that took place at this modern-day site of Whitman Mission, the National Historic Site. We're going to briefly touch on that. But after that, I want to dive into some of the larger, bigger, long-term implications and impacts and legacies. After we do that, we're going to move into how this history has been remembered and how it's still being examined and looked at today, because of course it is very much being examined and looked at today. So let's dive in. If you weren't already aware, Whitman Mission is one of 400 plus units of the National Park Service. They're spread across the entire country. On this map here, that little tiny yellow star is roughly where Whitman Mission is. And each one of those black letterings is a different unit of the National Park Service. This place has national significance. It has international impacts. So I know this. Obviously, I work there. Now, all of you know this, but it's actually really surprising how many people, especially local people, will come into the park and they think it's a city park or a state park, and they aren't aware that it's a unit of the National Park Service with this national and international significance. So over my time there, many hours, I've pondered this question. How do so many people in our local community, right here in Walla, in Pendleton, in Milton Freewater, in Touchy, even in the Tri-Cities, how do they not know they have a unit of the National Park Service literally in their backyard? And my theory is that there's been too much focus on this. There's been too narrow focus on the killing of the missionaries there at the park, what we sometimes call the attack on the mission, right? Too much focus on the killing itself of the missionaries, and not enough focus on this domino chain of events that was set in motion with these people's deaths, right? We need to look at more of the impacts, more of the implications to get to that national significance. So it's less of looking at the killings themselves, but more of looking at the reaction to the killings. And that's where we start to see this bigger scope, this national, international impact. So what we're going to start with today is we're going to start by looking at the place where most people get stuck, and that is here, the attack on the mission. A lot of people never get past this point. And this is why I think a lot of people never get to that larger consequence, those larger impacts. But today, we are going to start with this. Right now, it is November 18th, 2021. I almost said 2020. I think that's where my brain is at. I haven't caught up. Today is November 18th, 2021. On November 29th, 1847, 13 people were killed at the present-day location of Whitman Mission National Historic Site. At that time, so we are 11 days away from that anniversary. I had to bring this in because we're in such close proximity to that event. So that's where I wanted to start, with the event itself. In November of 1847, the location of the mission station here is far outside the boundaries of the United States. It is not on United States land. It is solidly within the boundaries of the Cayuse Nation. It is 100% within Cayuse homeland. At this time, a new disease was ravaging many of the folks in the local area. This disease is known as measles today. But for many Cayuse families, for all Cayuse families, this was a brand new disease. It's a really interesting parallel to some of the stuff that we've been experiencing today with the new disease that we don't have any immunity to, and the feelings and the reactions that generates. But this new disease, measles, was all over the place in the local area. Thousands of American immigrants had traveled into and through Cayuse homeland earlier that year on what we now know today as that Oregon Trail. And on November 29th, 1847, a small group of Cayuse men came to the mission site, and they would kill both of the missionaries, both of the Whitmans, as well as 11 other people on site that day. 13 people were dead at the end of that attack. The way I've heard it framed through conversations with our tribal partners is that the action of those men, those Cayuse men, it was an act of protection, right, for the future of their community. So this action was taken from a place of protection of the future. And like I said, at the end of the attack, there were 13 people who were killed, both of the missionaries included. There were about 50 people who were also there at the site who were held for about a month before the Hudson's Bay Company came in and offered a ransom, and then they would go on to live the rest of their lives, however it panned out for them. So what I've just gone over, these are the sensational, these are the dramatic, these are the eye-catching, the details that everyone wants to spend more time on. These are the questions we get, where did such and such person die? How exactly did they die? What exactly panned out on that day in late November? And the details of the attack, they have their time and their place. But if we don't go deeper, if we dwell in these dramatic, eye-catching, flashy, sensational details, we're never going to get beyond it. We won't get to deeper meaning and relevance. So let's go deeper. More important than these flashy, dramatic details are the long-term impacts of the 13 deaths there at the mission site. Why did the nation care about the deaths of these 13 people that were far outside the boundaries of the nation at the time? Why did it matter then? Why does it still matter today? The death of the individuals in late November 1847 set into motion a chain of events that is still directly impacting people's lives today. All right.
What was that a picture of?
Oh, good question. I often will not explain pictures, and I apologize about that, so I'm glad you asked. This is an image of the location of the Great Grave, which is what it's called at the park today, prior to there being that big marble slab and marker there. So this photo is facing in the southwesterly direction, generally. Thank you for asking. Right, let's dig a little deeper. 13 people are killed, some massive impacts resonate and still resonate right now today. And the first of those is having to do with United States acquisition of land. So, like I said, 1847, this area where we're standing right now, where I go to work every day, is not United States land. There had been legislation to add what was known as Oregon country. There had been legislation back east in Congress, in the United States Congress, to add that chunk of land into the United States government. And this legislation had been around for years, but it was stuck in Congress. Why, you might ask? Because this is before the Civil War, right? So anytime the United States was looking to add new territory, they were also trying to maintain in Congress the balance between states that had slavery and states that did not have slavery. So anytime you were talking about adding new land, potentially new states, into the Union, there was a long, protracted debate about, well, should we? Will it keep this balance? Is it going to get unbalanced? So yes, there was legislation proposing to add Oregon country into the United States, but it was really going nowhere. It had been in there for quite a while, and it was just kind of sitting dormant. When news of the attack on the mission station gets back east, it's all over newspapers in Boston and in New York and Washington, D.C., and in these newspaper accounts, the attack is extremely sensationalized, right? It's very dramatized. And in these Eastern presses, people are reading these sensationalized accounts of what happened, and it's stirring up these emotions of fear and worry. And a mere 8 months, 8.5 months after the attack on the mission station, this legislation that was dormant, not going anywhere, it passes Congress. Congress officially establishes Oregon country as Oregon territory in, the legislative blink of an eye, very, very quickly, in direct response to the news accounts of what had taken place, right here in this valley where we are right now. This map shows the area that Oregon territory encompassed. It's got the modern state boundaries on it, so you can kind of get a sense of how big it actually was. This Oregon Territory encompassed basically most of the Pacific Northwest, all of Washington State, all of what would become Oregon State, and all of what would become the state of Idaho, as well as parts of Montana and Wyoming. A huge area. So the addition of this entire corner of the United States has a direct link back to the events that took place here, around this time of year in 1847. After this became Oregon Territory, after it became United States land, the military followed. We're at Fort Walla Walla. Of course, this place knows a lot about the military history of this valley in terms of the United States military. But the U.S. military followed after this became officially part of the United States. And the U.S. military was engaging in conflict with the Cayuse in the Cayuse War. And unfortunately, they were engaging in conflict with many of the other native nations in this area. This led to a lot of spillover violence, a lot of, it led to a lot of spillover bloodshed. And it led to a lot of challenged relationships in the future. In 1855, this valley hosted, so Oregon Territory is added in 1848. In 1855, the Walla Walla Valley hosted a massive gathering of a lot of different nations. There were representatives from, some of the nations that were represented here were the Cayuse, the Walla Walla, the Yakima, the Nez Perce, and the United States. All of these different nations and representatives from the nations were gathered here in what today makes up some of downtown Walla Walla and the Whitman College campus. They were here because they were negotiating a treaty between the United States government and these various native nations. The drawing that's here behind me is showing the entrance of the Nez Perce into those treaty negotiations. Very grateful there was an artist there to take some visual depictions of what was going on. So this treaty is negotiated. It's a really protracted, it's a long treaty negotiation. And from this treaty negotiation, it established a number of different reservations in the Pacific Northwest in what is today Washington and Oregon and Idaho. And specifically, the Treaty of 1855 established the Umatilla Indian Reservation. The Umatilla Indian Reservation has 3 different tribes confederated onto the one reservation, the Cayuse, the Walla Walla, and the Umatilla. And as you're taking a look at that map that's on the wall behind me, you see this big green shape. Can you guys see, or am I in the way? Okay. You see this big green shape. Now that large green shape represents traditional homeland of those 3 groups, those 3 nations. There's some state boundaries, there's some modern highways, there's riverways on that map as well. But if you look closely, you can kind of see in the very middle, there's a darker green shape. Can you guys see that? Is the contrast high enough? All right. In the very middle, there's a darker, smaller green shape. And that darker green shape is the present-day reservation for the Umatillas, the Walla Wallas, and the Cayuse. So it's a visual depiction of the diminishment of that homeland, stemming from the Treaty of 1855. The treaty is still in place today. The United States government still deals with the Cayuse, Walla Walla, and Umatilla on this nation-to-nation basis, and the reservation is still also in place today.
What is the name of that town that's at the very bottom right-hand? Ontario, I think.
Yeah. In Oregon. Yep. Yeah, apologies that it's so small. So, for generations, for decades, for years and years and years, the history relating to this attack, these events, this series of events, this domino chain of impacts, it was told pretty much solely from one perspective. And that one perspective was that of the Whitmans, or that of the white American immigrants who were newcomers to this area. How this story was told from that one singular perspective, it ignored so many of the other valuable, rich perspectives that make, and because it ignored so many of those different perspectives, it makes those older histories incomplete, makes them skewed, makes them biased towards a particular telling of this story, towards a view on how this history unfolded. Some of the perspectives, sometimes we think about this history as like, well, it was the missionaries and the Cayuse. And one of the things we really encourage people to think about it is just more, it's much more than just two perspectives that we need to talk about when we talk about this history. Yes, it is the Cayuse and the missionaries, but it's also the Walla people, the Métis, the Catholic missionaries who were out here too, the French-Canadian fur trappers, the British government and their interests in this area. So it's not just a singular, two sides to this story. It is a multiple sides to this story. And when we incorporate those different perspectives, we find a much more full, complete, well-rounded picture of this history. So we just so happen to be in this great special moment where the public, where journalists, where historians, people are revisiting this history. As someone who works at Whitman Mission, who talks about this history on a daily basis, man, I am so happy about this. It's been quite a while since there's been any new writing, new authorship that's centered on this history. There were, of course, the 2-volume Clifford Drury books. That was back in the 70s. There's a biography of Narcissa Whitman that is more recent. But if we're talking about histories and books that are available broadly, that are focused pretty much solely on this moment, this history, we're in luck, because 3 of them were just published in about the last year. You can see the titles of all 3 of these books behind me. These 3 new books offer more perspectives. I am by no means saying that these are the end-all, be-all on the history that deals with Whitman Mission. These books do a better job of integrating Cayuse and Walla and Métis and French-Canadian perspectives and voices. And they do a better job. Is there still more work to do? Yes, definitely. But one of the things that I think is really nice about this set of 3 books is that the 3 authors made an intentional effort to tie it to conversations that are happening right now today. Because as we started with those news articles, we know the public is having these conversations. We know that people in Walla and Olympia and across the Pacific Northwest are talking about this history, talking about perhaps how it's been memorialized, how it's been represented in statue form, talking about the myths that cropped up around this history. So we know the public is talking about it. And one of the nice things about what some of these authors are doing is they're bringing in those modern conversations into what they're writing. So as someone who works with this history day in and day out, I think it's great. These conversations that are happening right now have been happening among staff at Whitman Mission, among National Park Service staff, for at least 10 years. So for folks who are out at Whitman Mission every day, embedded in this history, really trying to learn from it and take these lessons away, the National Park Service at Whitman Mission has been reevaluating how we are telling this story. and how the Park Service has told the story in the past. We're also evaluating whose perspectives have been elevated in how the park has told the story and whose perspectives have been ignored. We're trying to evaluate that and move forward in a better direction. Move forward being more aware of what has been done and move forward more intentionally. So the starting point for this reevaluation from the National Park Service was really a renewed commitment to collaboration and consultation with our tribal partners, which is representatives from the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. So starting about 10 years ago, that's a ballpark estimate of 10 years, there was this big renewed effort to really work, consult, collaborate, start from the ground up with our tribal partners. And this renewed commitment to that relationship has led to, it's led the park to update or improve a number of things of how we're telling this story. The first one was the park film. For many of you, if you've been out to Whitman Mission in recent years and you've watched the park film, it dates to 2014, relatively recent. And it does a pretty good job of explaining the complexities of the history from multiple different perspectives and points of view. But this park film was a huge improvement from what was there before. So on the next slide, I've got some still shots of the old park film. And these still shots exemplify some of the shortcomings in that earlier way of interpreting this history. So these are screenshots from that old park film. There's 3 of them on the screen. The captioning is the narration in the film. It's all open caption, so this shows every time you see it. One of the still shots shows an image of a Tule lodge in the foreground with a person in buckskin reading and some what we can presume to be Cayuse men on the sitting on the ground. And the caption is, "A proud, haughty, nomadic people." Another shot shows some kind of a geologic formation with a train of wagons, and it's talking about Marcus Whitman in 1843. And the caption is, "Was leading a populace into the promised land." And then the third one is kind of small down there at the bottom. Figures are 2 figures seated on horseback. And the caption is, again, the narrator's talking about Marcus and Narcissa Whitman at this point, and it was, the caption is, "It was their tragedy to be misunderstood." That quote continues on. The full quote is, "It was their tragedy to be misunderstood, both by those they came to save and by history." So this is how the National Park Service formerly was telling this story. Very, very heavily biased towards the missionary's perspective. Not much perspective included from any of those other points of view that have a stake and that were participants in how the history was unfolding. In 2014, we did get our new film, and it's what we still show in the park today. Now, it's not perfect, but it is a step forward in the right direction. And it definitely includes more of those different perspectives and different voices represented there on the screen. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. It's on our website. You can check it out from the comfort of your home. But another change that the National Park Service, another shift that the National Park Service has been participating in ongoing for the last few years is to the land itself. So the land that encompasses the park today has been changing. And if you've lived in the Walla Valley for a while, you may have noticed these changes. You may have noticed that where there was once green mowed grass, there is no longer. The National Park Service has been working to restore a lot of the native plant species to the land itself. Planting native grasses, things like Great Basin wild rye and wheatgrass, pashka or balsam root sunflower, dogbane, tule, all of these wonderful native plant species that we're working to reintroduce and really give them the space to flourish. One of the things that we've had to combat is what we call the built environment. So when you go to Whitman Mission today, you see a modern visitor center and a parking lot and a flagpole. But what we in interpretation, what we call tangible resources, things you can see, touch, feel, look at, all of those tangible resources at Whitman Mission, they include fences, outlines of missionary building structures, graves of the missionaries and the other immigrants to the area, a reconstructed mill pond that the missionaries had built, a monument to the missionaries. Anyone notice a trend here? Everything in the built environment at Whitman Mission, all of those tangible things that you can see and that you can connect to, they're all skewed towards this one perspective. So the built environment at the park swings to favor the immigrant perspective, the missionary perspective. So when visitors go and they walk around the park, it's way easier for them to connect with that perspective because they can see things that they can relate to. Fences and mill ponds and irrigation ditches and graves. There's nothing at Whitman Mission that's permanently there in that built environment that represents the Cayuse perspective, right? So how the park was originally built and structured even skews this way. So one of the things we're trying to do to kind of balance that out is to reintroduce some of these native plant species. So where there once was, nice mowed grass, you could, have a picnic on it or whatever. Now we have taller native grasses. This picture in the upper corner, it's taken from the mission site looking towards the hill, and you can see those tall grasses where that short mowed grass used to be. The other image in the lower corner is taken from the hill looking down at the mission site. It shows our very sad and empty pond. It dried out completely this summer. Kind of a scary sign of the times. But just to the right of the pond, you again see those tall native grasses. So again, thinking about the built environment, how what we see when we go visit a place impacts what we can connect to and how we feel about it, and the perspectives that we can empathize with. And most recently, the park has been working to update our park brochure, which was updated in this time last year, and our waysides. What we in the Park Service call waysides are basically the outdoor interpretive panels, which you see here. This interpretive panel dates back to the late 1970s. It is very old. It needs updating for a number of reasons. But we also get complaints about our outdoor wayside exhibits. We get complaints that they are insensitive, that they're offensive, that they are way too biased. And we agree. We are working to change these wayside exhibits, again, in partnership and consultation with our partners, the CTYR. So we're actively, in the middle of this process right now. And one of the cool things we've done in the meantime is we've put these small labels in the corner. We try and keep up on them because the wind likes to blow them off, and we lose them all the time. But it's a little label that says, this panel contains one-sided representations of history and can perpetuate harmful stereotypes. And it goes on, saying we're updating these. And then it poses a question to visitors as they walk around. How does learning a new perspective change how you view things? And it's been amazing. Since we've had these little labels on our interpretive panels, I have had more really good conversations with visitors, really thoughtful conversations about the panels and the history than maybe I have before. It's prompted so many wonderful, deep conversations about how this story is being told and why. Now, all this is well and good, but there is always more work to be done. I personally, as well as other staff at Whitman Mission, we are always looking to learn more from our tribal partners, from folks who are invested in this history. We are always looking to improve, and of course, we're always looking to help more people find meaning in this place and find relevance in this history. So, like I said at the start of the talk, this history in this place is super complex. It's really complicated. You can dive in and go in a million different rabbit holes, and I still learn things on a daily basis, and I've been working there for a bit. There is so much to learn, so much to talk about, so much to, help visitors come to see. And I spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about this history. Surprise, surprise, I work there. And as I think about it, as I talk about it, I've found that one of the best ways to understand the complexities, the complications, the fascinating little corners of this history and this story, and one of the best ways to find relevance with the story at Whitman Mission is by exposing ourselves to all of those different ideas and voices and perspectives, and working to fully understand the significance of those voices and the impacts of this story on a larger stage. My advice to you, what I ask of you, don't get stuck in the dramatic. Don't get stuck in the sensational, those, exciting, flashy details of this history. If you push past those dramatic, flashy, exciting details to the implications of those 13 deaths, those 13 people, we can find so many lessons to carry with us in our everyday lives still today. That's what I think about when I'm at work there. So with that, guys, I do want to say thank you. If you have questions, I'm all ears. Yeah.
So, I have a direct relative who was very much involved with Whitman Mission.
Yeah.
Gertrude Hall. She married a gentleman named Judge Owen Nickerson Denny.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the Consul General under Ulysses S. Grant to China and Korea.
Oh.
And she was a child at the time of the killings there.
Yeah.
And I think she was 11 or 12 years old. Anyway, the interesting article that Nickerson Denny wrote was about his wife. And he talked about how she feared the Walla Walla Valley and never wanted to return.
Yeah.
And they never did come back to it. But his relative did come back to it. And that was Arthur Denny, who bought and started the city of Seattle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's why the Denny building exists in Walla.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating history.
Yeah.
Very cool. Wow. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. I was actually just chatting with him yesterday. He came into the park yesterday. Other questions? Clarifications?
Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to be back in Walla Walla. I'm happy to be here, for sure. Yeah?
You notice different slang or questions that people have when they're visiting from when you were there before?
Yeah, 100%. One of the interesting things, so one of the reasons we put those labels on our outdoor wayside exhibits is because we got complaints, which we had never gotten complaints about our wayside exhibits before. And I think, this is part of a larger national and international conversation about who's been telling the history and who's been excluded from the history. So I think over the last few years, as I was gone and then came back, just generally more people are engaging in conversations about history, memorialization, monuments, things like that. So there's definitely been a lot more questions, comments, and things like that we didn't get a few years ago. So, yeah.
Would you anticipate making a Tule Teepee Village replica?
That's a question that we would ask our tribal partners how they felt about it before we would come to any decision. What's that?
It would be nice to see that.
Yeah, it would be, yeah. But again, we would be relying on, none of the national park rangers, most people are from elsewhere, and so we would really want to have that conversation with representatives from C2IR, for sure. But it's a great thought, definitely. Yes.
How far back in history has this questioning begun to bring more?
Different perspectives? Oh.
Is this recent with what's going on in the last 5 years, or this goes back?
It goes back further than that. When, of course, hindsight's always 20/20. So one of the interesting things is when those waysides went in, when the film, that old film was done, when all of this happened, there was actually some folks in the Walla Walla community who were displeased because they thought it was introducing too much counter perspective to the Whitmans. And of course, we look at it today and we're like, oh my gosh, we need to do more. And so I'm sure, at that time, people were talking about representation and how the story was being told. I think maybe now it's just amplified because we're seeing it on a larger level. It's not just in a local community or, not only historians are talking about it anymore. It's everyday folks, which is kind of cool. I always like seeing people getting involved with their history or the history of their area or that place or whatever. So it's a good sign for me. But I don't know how far back it goes, but I do know that conversations like this have been, in one form or another, they've been going on. So, did you have a question over here?
I just wondered what the suggestion was of the lady in the red mask.
Oh, yeah. She had asked about any thought to putting up a Tule village or a kind of a representation of a Cayuse village site in the park. Yeah. Anything else? No? All right. Well, thanks again, everyone.